The morning sun cast long shadows across Willowbrook Estates as I guided my twin daughters, Emma and Sophie, along the familiar sidewalk toward the community park. At 12 years old, both girls had been blind since birth due to a rare genetic condition, but their spirits burned brighter than any sighted child I'd ever known. Emma's guide dog, Luna, a perfectly trained golden retriever, walked steadily beside her, while Sophie preferred using her white cane, tapping it rhythmically against the pavement in a pattern that had become as natural to her as breathing. "Dad, can we hear the fountain today?" Sophie asked, her face turned toward the direction of the park's centerpiece water feature. Her acute hearing had developed to an almost supernatural level, and she could detect the subtle changes in water flow that most people would never notice. "Of course, sweetheart," I replied, adjusting my off-duty civilian clothes. Most residents of our upscale neighborhood had no idea that Detective Commander James Mitchell, the man who lived in the modest two-story house at the end of Maple Street, was actually the head of the Metropolitan Police Department's K-9 division. After 23 years in law enforcement, with the last 8 specifically dedicated to training police dogs and their handlers, I'd learned to keep my professional life separate from my personal one. It helped that I'd moved to Willowbrook Estates after my divorce 2 years ago, seeking a fresh start for myself and my daughters. The community was generally welcoming, filled with families who appreciated the well-maintained lawns, the weekly farmers market, and the sense of security that came with living in a gated neighborhood. However, there was one resident who had made it her personal mission to make our lives as difficult as possible. Margaret Pemberton, the self-appointed queen of the Homeowners Association. Margaret, whom my daughters had privately nicknamed Scary Margaret after our first unfortunate encounter, was a woman in her early 60s with silver hair that she kept in a tight bun and a perpetual expression of disapproval. She'd made it clear from day one that she didn't appreciate having those kind of people in her neighborhood, a thinly veiled reference to my daughter's disabilities and my status as a single father. Her complaints had ranged from the ridiculous to the downright malicious. Luna's presence violated the aesthetic standards of the community. My daughter's white canes were unsightly, and their occasional laughter while playing in our backyard constituted a noise disturbance. As we approached the park, I noticed Margaret's distinctive silver BMW parked near the entrance, and my stomach tightened. She'd been increasingly aggressive in her harassment over the past few weeks, ever since the HOA had unanimously voted down her proposal to ban service animals from common areas. The defeat had clearly eaten away at her, and I suspected she was planning something more direct than her usual passive-aggressive tactics. "Mr. Mitchell!" Emma called out, having heard the familiar sound of another dog approaching. Her trained ear could distinguish between different breeds and temperaments just by listening to their gait and breathing patterns. "That doesn't sound like a friendly dog." I looked up to see Margaret approaching with what appeared to be a massive German Shepherd mix, easily weighing over 100 pounds. The dog was straining against a thick chain leash, its head low and muscles tense. Even from 50 feet away, I could see the telltale signs of poor training and possible aggression. The rigid posture, the fixed stare, the way its hackles were already beginning to rise. "Stay close to me, girls," I said quietly, instinctively, positioning myself between them and the approaching threat. Luna, perfectly trained and deeply bonded with Emma, had already moved into a protective stance, her own body language shifting to alert but controlled readiness. Margaret's voice carried across the park with the kind of artificial sweetness that immediately put me on edge. "Well, well, well. If it isn't the Mitchell family out for another one of their little walks, I hope you're not planning to let that creature run loose in our beautiful park today." "Luna is a certified service dog, Mrs. Pemberton," I replied evenly, though my hands were already moving to guide my daughters slightly behind me. "She's perfectly trained and has every legal right to be here." "Legal rights?" Margaret scoffed, and I noticed she was deliberately allowing her own dog to pull her closer to us. "Do you know what I think about legal rights? I think people who can't take care of themselves shouldn't be allowed to burden the rest of us with their problems." The words hit like a physical blow, but before I could respond, Sophie's voice cut through the tension with the kind of clarity that only children possess. "Dad, why is that lady so angry all the time? Doesn't she know that being mean to people makes you ugly on the inside?" Margaret's face flushed red, and her grip on the chain leash loosened slightly. "You little brat. I'll show you and your father what happens when you don't show proper respect in this neighborhood." What happened next unfolded in slow motion, though it couldn't have lasted more than a few seconds. Margaret deliberately released her grip on the chain, and the massive dog lunged forward with a growl that sounded like it came from the depths of hell itself. The animal was clearly untrained, driven by territorial aggression and possibly years of poor handling. It charged directly toward Emma and Sophie, who had no way to see the 100-pound missile of fur and teeth bearing down on them. Luna immediately sprang into action, placing herself between the attacking dog and Emma. But she was a golden retriever trained for guidance, not protection. The size difference was overwhelming, and while Luna's courage was absolute, her training had never prepared her for this kind of violent confrontation. "Emma! Sophie! Down!" I shouted, drawing on every second of my K-9 training as I moved to intercept the attacking dog. But even as I lunged forward, I knew I was too far away, and the girls were too confused and frightened to react quickly enough. The attacking dog's jaws were open, its trajectory aimed directly at Emma's face, when something extraordinary happened. A blur of motion shot past me. Another dog, this one moving with the fluid precision of a trained professional. The newcomer hit Margaret's dog with a perfectly calculated impact, sending both animals tumbling in a controlled collision that neutralized the attack without causing serious injury to either animal. As the dust settled, I found myself staring at a magnificent Belgian Malinois, perfectly poised and alert, standing protectively over my daughters while keeping the now subdued attacking dog pinned with nothing more than dominant body language and a low, authoritative growl. "Atlas, heel," came a calm, professional voice, and the Malinois immediately moved to a position beside a woman I'd never seen before. She was tall, athletic, probably in her mid-30s, with short auburn hair and the kind of confident bearing that spoke of military or law enforcement training. "Everyone okay?" she asked, her eyes quickly assessing the situation while keeping one hand on Atlas's collar. The attacking dog, now thoroughly intimidated, had slunk back toward Margaret, who was standing slack-jawed at the complete failure of her planned assault. "We're fine, thanks to you," I said, helping Emma and Sophie to their feet, while Luna performed her own anxious inspection of her charges. "That was incredible timing." The woman smiled, extending her hand. "Captain Sarah Chen, Metro PD. I just moved into the neighborhood yesterday, and I was out exploring with my partner here." She gestured to Atlas, who was maintaining perfect discipline despite the lingering tension. I couldn't help but notice the situation developing. My mouth nearly fell open. "Captain Chen, I'm Commander Mitchell, K-9 Division. I've been looking forward to meeting you. Your reputation precedes you." "Commander Mitchell," she said, her smile widening with recognition. "Well, this is certainly an interesting way to make introductions. I take it this isn't the first time you've had trouble with—" She glanced meaningfully at Margaret, who was still standing frozen with her now cowering dog. "Unfortunately, no," I replied, keeping my voice level despite the rage building inside me. "Mrs. Pemberton has made it her personal mission to make life difficult for my daughters." Margaret finally found her voice, though it came out as a strangled squeak. You can't prove anything. Rex was just being friendly. Those girls were probably doing something to provoke him." Captain Chen's expression hardened as she took in the full scope of what had just happened. "Ma'am, I'm a police officer, and I just witnessed you deliberately release an untrained, aggressive dog with the apparent intent of allowing it to attack 2 children. That constitutes assault with a dangerous weapon, child endangerment, and several other charges, I'm sure. I can think of once I've had time to review the statutes." "You can't arrest me," Margaret sputtered. "I'm the HOA president. I own 3 houses in this neighborhood. I donate to the Police Benevolent Association." "Actually, I can and I will," Captain Chen replied, reaching for her radio. "Commander Mitchell, would you mind calling this in? I think we need to have a more formal conversation about Mrs. Pemberton's approach to neighborhood relations." As I pulled out my phone to contact dispatch, I noticed that we'd attracted quite an audience. Several neighbors had emerged from their homes drawn by the commotion, and I could see recognition dawning on their faces as they realized what they'd witnessed. Margaret. 3 hours later, I sat in the Willowbrook Estates Community Center's main conference room, watching Margaret Pemberton's world systematically unravel. What had started as a simple assault case had exploded into something far more complex and disturbing than anyone could have anticipated. Captain Chen sat across from me, her laptop open, displaying a series of documents that painted a picture of corruption, fraud, and abuse of power that stretched back nearly 5 years. "Commander, you need to see this," she said, turning her screen toward me. When we ran background checks as part of the assault investigation, we discovered that Mrs. Pemberton has been operating what amounts to a criminal enterprise through her HOA position. The evidence was staggering. Margaret had been systematically targeting families with disabilities, elderly residents, and single parents, anyone she perceived as vulnerable, with bogus fines, illegal assessments, and harassment campaigns designed to force them to sell their homes below market value. She would then coordinate with her son-in-law's real estate company to purchase these properties through shell corporations, renovate them minimally, and resell them at enormous profits. "My God," I breathed, scrolling through bank records showing over $2 million in fraudulent transactions. "How many families?" 17 that we can prove so far, Captain Chen replied grimly. "Including the Williams family. Remember them? The elderly couple who moved out last year after Mrs. Williams had her stroke?" I remembered them well. Harold and Dorothy Williams had been kind neighbors who'd always waved at Emma and Sophie during our walks. They'd seemed perfectly happy until Dorothy's medical emergency, after which Margaret had suddenly begun citing them for dozens of minor violations. Within 6 months, they'd sold their house for significantly less than its assessed value and moved to a smaller apartment across town. "She targeted them right after Dorothy's stroke," I said, the pieces falling into place. "Waited until they were most vulnerable." "Exactly. And there's more." Captain Chen pulled up another file. "Remember how she always seemed to know exactly which residents to target? She's been illegally accessing medical records through her position on the County Health Advisory Board. HIPAA violations, identity theft, elder abuse, the charges are piling up fast." A knock at the door interrupted our review. Detective Rodriguez, one of my most experienced investigators, entered with a grim expression. "Commander, we've got a problem. Mrs. Pemberton's lawyer just arrived and he's not what we expected." "What do you mean?" I asked. "Theodore Blackwood." "Sir? He's not just any defense attorney. He's the guy who represents the Castellano crime family. Word is already spreading that this case might have connections to organized crime in the real estate sector." Captain Chen and I exchanged glances. This was escalating far beyond a neighborhood dispute. "Where is she now?" I asked. "Interview room 3 with her attorney." "But Commander, there's something else. She's demanding to speak with you specifically. Says she has information about your family that changes everything." My blood ran cold. "What kind of information?" "She wouldn't say, but she claims it's about your ex-wife and why you really moved to this neighborhood." The mention of my ex-wife hit like a physical blow. Rebecca and I had divorced 2 years ago after her complete inability to accept our daughter's disabilities led to increasingly erratic and harmful behavior. The final straw had come when she'd suggested that Emma and Sophie would be better off in an institution, claiming that their blindness was too much of a burden for a normal family to handle. The custody battle had been vicious, ending with Rebecca losing all parental rights after a psychological evaluation revealed deep-seated issues that made her unfit for custody. "I'll handle this," I said, standing up. "Captain Chen, can you stay with Emma and Sophie? They're in the children's area with Luna and Atlas." "Of course. But James, be careful. Something about this doesn't feel right." The walk to interview room 3 felt like a journey into hostile territory. Through the one-way glass, I could see Margaret sitting beside a man in an expensive suit, her earlier panic replaced by a cold confidence that immediately put me on alert. When I entered the room, her smile was predatory. "Commander Mitchell," she said smoothly. "So good of you to join us. I believe you know my attorney, Theodore Blackwood." Blackwood was a thin man with silver hair, and the kind of smile that never reached his eyes. "Commander, my client has some rather interesting information about your personal circumstances that she believes might provide context for today's misunderstanding." "There was no misunderstanding," I replied evenly. "Your client intentionally released an aggressive dog with the intent of having it attack 2 children. That's assault with a dangerous weapon and child endangerment. The motivation is irrelevant." Margaret's laugh was like broken glass. "Oh, but motivation is everything, isn't it? Tell me, Commander, does Captain Chen know about your ex-wife's connection to our little community?" My heart stopped. "What connection?" "Rebecca Mitchell, formerly Rebecca Castellano, didn't just happen to marry a police officer. She was placed here, James. Her family has been using properties in Willowbrook Estates to launder money for years. Your marriage, your move to this neighborhood, even your daughter's guide dog. It was all part of a larger operation." The room seemed to spin around me. "You're lying." Blackwood slid a folder across the table. "Property records, financial transactions, phone logs. Your ex-wife has been in contact with several residents here, including my client, for the past 3 years. She's been feeding information about police operations to her family's organization in exchange for their help in regaining custody of your daughters." I opened the folder with trembling hands. The evidence was damning. Photos of Rebecca meeting with known associates of the Castellano family, bank transfers that coincided with major drug busts in our district, and most horrifying of all, detailed surveillance reports about Emma and Sophie's daily routines. "She's been watching my daughters," I whispered. "Planning, actually," Margaret said with obvious satisfaction. "You see, blind children are particularly valuable in certain international markets. Rebecca convinced her family that the girls would be perfect for their overseas operations. Invisible, sympathetic, easily controlled." The revelation hit me like a physical assault. My ex-wife hadn't just abandoned our family. She'd been actively plotting to sell our daughters into human trafficking. And Margaret had been her inside source, using her position in the HOA to monitor and report on our activities. "Why are you telling me this?" I managed to ask. "Because things have changed," Blackwood replied. "My client is willing to testify against the Castellano operation in exchange for immunity on the HOA fraud charges. She wants to make a deal. And if I refuse?" Margaret's smile turned vicious. "Then Rebecca's associates will learn that their carefully laid plans have been discovered. Do you really want to put your daughters at risk just to satisfy your need for revenge?" The threat was clear, but something about the entire scenario felt wrong. Margaret was too confident, too prepared with exactly the right information to manipulate me. After 23 years in law enforcement, I'd developed a sixth sense for when I was being played. "I need time to process this," I said, closing the folder. "Of course," Blackwood replied, "but don't take too long. These kinds of opportunities have a way of disappearing quickly." As I left the interview room, my mind was racing. The revelations about Rebecca were devastating, but not entirely surprising. There had always been something about her family that hadn't added up. But Margaret's sudden willingness to cooperate, combined with Blackwood's presence, suggested a deeper game at play. I found Captain Chen in the children's area, watching Emma and Sophie play with Luna and Atlas. The dogs had formed an unlikely pack, with Atlas clearly appointed as the protector, and Luna maintaining her role as Emma's faithful guide. The sight of my daughters laughing and safe provided a moment of clarity in the chaos swirling around us. "How bad is it?" Captain Chen asked quietly. "Worse than we thought, but not in the way they want me to believe," I replied. "I think we're dealing with a sophisticated manipulation designed to protect a much larger operation." "What do you need?" "Time to think and someone I can trust to help me figure out what's really going on." Captain Chen nodded toward Emma and Sophie. "You know, your daughters are remarkable. While you were in the interview, Emma told me something interesting. She said she's been hearing the same car drive by your house every night for the past month, always at exactly 11:47 p.m. Sophie confirmed it. Apparently, The engine has a distinctive knock that makes it easy to identify. The information hit me like lightning. They've been conducting surveillance. That's what I thought. But here's the interesting part. Emma says the car stopped coming by 3 days ago, right around the time I moved into the neighborhood. Which means they know you're here and they know you're police. Or, Captain Chen said with a slight smile, they're afraid of something else entirely. Before I could ask what she meant, Detective Rodriguez appeared in the doorway, his expression urgent. Commander, we've got a situation. Mrs. Pemberton's attorney just received a phone call, and they're demanding immediate release. Apparently, someone with significant influence is applying